Welcome to this episode of the Alignment with Jen podcast. Today, we are going to be talking all about intuition. And there's an amazing quote that I love, and it is that intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect, in my opinion. Do you know who said that? It was Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. And I love to talk about Steve Jobs when we talk about intuition because he used intuition so much as one of the guiding principles, and it allowed him to create one of the most successful companies in the world. A big part of the reason that Apple was so successful is because he followed his intuition very early on. When he was in school, he decided to drop out of school and he began auditing classes just that interested him. And something that really interested him was calligraphy, which is like the beautiful writing. And him learning about calligraphy, even though at the time he had no idea why, he had no purpose for him to learn about calligraphy, simply it was just interesting to him. He ended up using that in order to create the beautiful typeface that was one of the things that really distinguished Apple from its competitors at the time. And what's really interesting about that is when you think about part of the reason Apple is so successful is because it is a beautiful user experience, right? And that is a big part of his early learnings that he had had. And so I share that because our intuition is something that is exceptionally powerful and it is able to collapse time when we learn how to use it correctly. But I think that nowadays we're almost like intuition starved in that a lot of people are so in their fight or flight, they're so in their doing and in their hustle, and they're not leaned back enough to be able to listen to their intuition. The thing is, our intuition is always on. It is our ability to listen to it and our ability to actually take action on it that allows us to be very powerful, intuitive people. And I really believe that in order for you to reach your highest timeline in the most rapid way possible, you have to use your intuition. Intuition literally collapses time. For myself, I look back at my own timeline and the biggest leaps I've ever made have been from following my own intuition. And so today, what I really want to give you is essentially a guide to first understand what is intuition. One of the biggest questions I get is, Jen, is this my intuition or is this my fear? Is this something that I'm just afraid of, right? The ability to distinguish our intuition from truth versus not truth. And then I also want to give you a little guidebook of how to actually build your intuition in order to become a very powerful intuitive. So I'm really, really excited about this episode. I hope that you absolutely love it. So I want to share a part of my own journey that really, I feel like collapsed time and allowed me to do a very large quantum leap. In my life, I've had a lot of these experiences where I feel like my whole life changed in a very short period of time. And it was always from my ability to follow my intuition. That's the only way I can explain it. Even my business, I was at this dinner party last night and somebody asked me like, oh, how'd you start your business? And I don't even really know how to answer that question because for me, it was just like following my intuition after intuition after intuition. I don't remember getting the ideas. I just remember moving and being pulled by life. And that's a certain aspect of intuition. And I've developed that over time, right? And so I want to help you develop and strengthen your intuition so you can collapse time. Last December, I was at dinner with a friend and she starts telling me about how she wants to start a podcast and she's going to be working with these people to record the podcast in a studio. And at the time I had this podcast, but it was more of a hobby. It was like I would record episodes when I felt like it, when I felt inspired. I didn't do any video, anything like that. And when she said that, I just had this intuitive knowing like you need to find a podcast studio. You need to start filming in the studio. It was that deep intuitive knowing, right? And that's something I want you to think about for yourself is what does intuition feel like in your body? And we'll talk about that more. For me, it just feels like this. I just know that that's what I'm supposed to do. So I found this podcast studio that I'm recording in now. And as a result, it has helped me to create the kind of business that I wanted. It really shifted my business model. Now I have so many people reaching out who really understand what I teach and understand what I am about versus before people didn't understand what I was teaching and it didn't feel as cohesive as it does now. But what's really interesting is the reason that this was so significant is I didn't really have a reason to actually record the podcast in a studio. It's obviously an investment to do that. It didn't really make financial sense, right? The math wasn't really mathing because I wasn't making any money off of it. I wasn't getting very many views at the time on my podcast. Like I was getting maybe like 200 listens an episode, which is very little. So there was no logical reason for me to do it. And that's a very big hallmark of why people don't follow their intuition, is because they try to logic it out. But I knew, because I've done this before, right, what it felt like for me. So I followed that intuition. And what I didn't know is that Spotify had been pushing video on the platform. Podcasts that were hosted on Spotify with video were getting pushed out more. So my podcast started getting pushed out a ton. And that's what allowed me to kind of shift and change my business into something that felt more aligned, drew in even more amazing, amazing people into my world, has helped me to grow my business. And it was all simply because I followed that intuition. I didn't try to logic it out. I just trusted. Right? And so for you, I want you to think about that as kind of, where can you apply that into your own life to actually follow your own intuition, to take steps that maybe you can't explain logically, but that are going to allow you to collapse time. I really feel this was a time collapse for me. And it was because I was able to have faith. I was able to trust. A big part of intuition is being able to have faith, being able to have courage and trust that even though you can't logically explain why something feels right for you, that it is right for you, and that you don't need anybody else to explain it to you or make it make sense. I didn't really tell that many people I was doing this because I didn't want them to be like, oh, is that really a good idea? Does that actually make sense, right? Is that worth the investment? Maybe you should spend your money on something else. I didn't want that energy. I knew this was right for me, right? And so for you, where in your life are you trying to logic something out rather than just listening to what you deeply know in your soul to be true? So as women, we are naturally very, very intuitive. Our intuition is naturally strong from birth. We may, as we grow, right, not be able to listen to it as much, but when you start practicing these tools I'm going to give you in this episode, it's going to strengthen. And my goal is that you will begin to make more decisions just trusting yourself, trusting your intuition, rather than trying to get everybody else's opinion, right? Outsourcing and being like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Because that weakens the energy of what you are manifesting. So imagine that what you're manifesting is like a little seedling that you plant into the ground. When you plant a seed, it is fragile. It's a very fragile thing, and you have to water it and you have to let it grow before it can grow into this strong, impenetrable oak tree. Okay, but that takes time and energy and nurturing. The same thing is true for your manifestations. When they're new and you don't have any evidence of them, they are fragile, just like that seed. And so when you share them with people, you have to be very conscious about who you're sharing them with, because they will put their limiting beliefs, their limited thought patterns on you, and they will limit you. And they may not that this is their fault, right? It's your choice whether you take action or not, but their influence may inhibit you in some way from taking action. So you want to be very conscious about who you share these things with. There's some things that I won't share with anyone except for my very, very closest friends, because I want to let them grow and strengthen. I don't want the negative energy that they may unconsciously, I don't think any of this is malicious, but that they may be unconsciously putting on you. I want to share with you a bit about the science of intuition first, because I think whenever we understand the science, it helps us to believe more deeply, right? It's like we get to logic it out a little bit. Intuition is not just a spiritual concept. It is also something that is very much based in how the brain actually works. What I believe is that intuition is your subconscious mind, your conscious mind, your body, your nervous system, and your higher self, your more spiritual self, all working together to coordinate for you to understand. The issue is that oftentimes our subconscious mind and our nervous system are taking in massive amounts of information. And as you know, if you've listened to my podcast before, distilling it down into a very small amount of information. And that small amount of information is what you are made consciously aware of. Less than 1% of the information that your nervous system and body and brain are taking in every single second is what you are then made aware of. That's a very small amount of information. So sometimes our subconscious mind can just give us this knowing, and we can't logic it out because all that information has been swept away and not made into our awareness. So sometimes the reason that we may not be able to logically explain things is literally because our mind is like, you don't need to know that. You just have to have this knowing, this feeling for us to understand it. Okay, that's kind of the neurological understanding of it. Another thing to know is that your brain and your nervous system are constantly scanning for cues in your environment using all of your different senses. And oftentimes we might feel something in our body, like a tightness in our chest or a beating in our heart or a relaxation in our nervous system. And we don't consider those as important because we can't logically explain why we're feeling those. But the thing is to know that those are all coming from information that our mind and body is absorbing from our environment that we're not consciously aware of. And so when we can start to tune in more to those bodily sensations of what's actually happening in my body, how do I actually feel on that first date with that guy? Do I feel like I can relax, or do I feel like I am just kind of on edge, right? Or how do I feel, in that new home that I'm visiting? Do I feel really good, or do I feel like something's subtly off? Because that information, it's very easy to dismiss it because we can't explain why we feel that way, but just know that there's massive amounts of information typically that are backing up that simple sensation. Another piece of this equation is something called the somatic marker hypothesis. So what this is that you use your bodily sensations and this information in order to make decisions. And so we think that our decisions are only based off of the information that we know and that we can write down on paper. But that's not the case. Our decisions are actually made through this union of what is happening in our body, our emotional state, our physiological state, and our conscious mind. So when we go to make a decision about something, like if I had written down on paper about the podcast and deciding to film in a studio, if I had written down all the reasons on paper, it would have probably been a very obvious maybe wait till later, or no, this isn't a great decision. And it's been an amazing decision for me and for my business and for the people that I work with, because I didn't go about it that way, right? I trusted those bodily signals, that intuition more. Okay, so understanding that emotions and sensation are also part of the decision-making equation, and we so often don't really take those into account. But those are actually indicators of vast amounts of information that we are not consciously aware of. Okay, I think that's fascinating personally. So let's talk a little bit about what happens that causes us to be blocked by our intuition. Something that can happen is when we get too much into a fight or flight or a beta brainwave state where we're in that doing, we're in that mode of got to get stuff done, right? From 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., we're just going. What happens is that it makes it more difficult for us to hear our intuition because we are so focused outward. We're focused on what we're doing. We're focused on everything that's going on around us versus on the actual connection with ourself. Oftentimes, we are more able to feel that true connection with ourself when we are more slowed down and we're in that alpha or theta brainwave state. Right? I've talked about this in many episodes that those slower brainwave states, when our system is more relaxed, are when we're able to receive more information from the quantum field, from our higher self. And so this is why oftentimes rest can really, really enhance our intuition. The way that I think about it is rest is an incubation period. So often we think that resting is not productive or a waste of time because we're not physically seeing the result of what we're doing. But the physical reality is only 1% of what we are actually experiencing. The other 99% is energetic. And when we are resting, we are incubating ideas. Think about a pregnancy, right? You can't really see a ton besides the growth of the belly that's going on, but there's a ton that's going on below the surface. There's this incubation occurring. And what does that incubation require? A lot of rest, right? It requires a lot of taking care of the body of the mother and of the baby. The same is true for anything that you want to manifest. There's going to be this requirement for that incubation period, because when you allow yourself to rest, what is actually happening is your subconscious mind is not stopping working on the problem. So say that you are working on finding a solution for something that's happening in your relationship. And you think about it, and then you're sitting there and you're like thinking, and you're like, okay, I just can't think about this anymore. I need to take a break. And you go and take a break and you go on a walk with your dog or you go for a drive. Oftentimes we'll have these amazing ideas in those moments because it allows our subconscious mind to basically do that work for us, even though we're not consciously thinking about it. And that's what happens in rest, right? I think in society today, we've so devalued rest. And I think it's magnificent. I notice for myself, the more I rest, the more I am actually successful in all areas of my life. That is because the ideas that I receive, the solutions that I receive are far better than if I'm in that doing beta brainwave state. Right? I'm opening myself up and I'm opening up my connection to the universe, to the creator, in order to receive ideas. They're shortcuts, essentially. Something to know is that stress can actually be something that really inhibits our intuition, because when we are stressed, we are focused on survival and it limits our creative abilities. It literally shuts down creative parts of our brain and makes us feel like we have blinders on and we can only see certain solutions. But what happens is when we regulate and calm the nervous system through rest and different practices is we open ourselves up to that creative capacity and our intuition strengthens. It's going to feel more like a calm, tranquil pond, and you drop one stone in that calm, tranquil pond versus a chaotic, rocky water and you drop a stone in it, right? That stone is going to be a lot more difficult to notice in that rocky water than in a calm, tranquil pond. And that's how our intuition works. It's a lot easier when we're calm to hear these insights and these intuitions, because intuition is not forceful. It is calm, it is present. So I want to talk a little bit about what intuition feels like. So intuition is going to feel calm, it's going to feel clear. It can feel different for each person, but I believe the frequency of it is pretty similar. It is grounded, it is neutral, it is not this frantic, urgent energy. That is a fear-based response, and the intuition doesn't come from fear. It is loving, it is certain, it is quiet but steady. It's not going to feel like this urgent, you must do this right now or everything is going to fall apart. That is a fear response. Intuition is going to move on a slower timeline because intuition is not capped by time like fear is. Fear is very focused on time and the physical reality. And I want to kind of share with you these two little lists that I made so you can understand sort of where intuition overlaps between science and spirituality, because I think both are talking about the exact same thing in so many circumstances. And I think it's helpful to understand what the different words are for them. So intuition scientifically is often talked about as unconscious pattern recognition, interoception, somatic intelligence, nervous system cues, right? The subconscious processing, that subconscious incubation period. That's how we talk about it more scientifically. But spirituality, we talk about it as our higher self, as our inner guidance, right? As the guidance of our soul, as our connection to the universe. And these are all talking about very similar things, but the science is talking about more the physical basis, right? And the spirituality is talking about the energetic basis. And I think it's so incredibly cool that science is catching up and is able to really explain things that spiritual texts have talked about for thousands of years. I think that's so cool that we're living in that time. So let's talk a little bit about why it can be hard to listen to your intuition and then how to actually listen to your intuition. So one of the reasons, and this is really the biggest reason that it's difficult for people to hear their intuition, is because they're so deeply ingrained in their old survival patterns, their old subconscious processes of fear of rejection, of scarcity, of fear of failure, of their old attachment patterns, of scarcity, of self-protection. When we are in survival and we are constantly scanning for threats, it's a lot more difficult to hear our intuition because our intuition is more of that creative capacity. Sometimes what can happen is if our old patterns are still running really strong, these old patterns, these old wounds can be confused for intuition. So an example of this I see a lot in relationships is, and this sometimes can be true, and I've heard this be true before for some of my clients, but thinking that a man is doing something bad or doesn't like her anymore, but what it really is that's coming up for her are her own attachment patterns, her own fears are coming up. right? And so she's filtering his behaviors based off of her fears, right? That's not intuition. That's that old pattern coming up. I see it around money a lot as well, where people will be fearful of running out of money or fearful of making decisions around money, and they won't be able to hear their intuition to guide them to the next step financially because they're in so much fear around it. Right? And not seeing that they're actually running on these fear-based patterns versus the patterns of our higher self and our higher soul. And our goal really is to clear out all that old gunk and to allow ourselves to see things more clearly in order to run our lives by our higher self and our intuition. And I always think about it of you're wearing some glasses and they're all smudged up and you clean off those glasses. That's what it feels like to remove all of those old patterns that are filtering your reality and making it more difficult for you to see things more clearly. And as always, if you would like help with that, that is what I do in my community. I have an amazing community to help reprogram those limiting beliefs, those subconscious patterns that are limiting you, and to really help you manifest that next level. It is such an amazing place. And if you're interested in learning more about that, send me a message on Instagram with the word podcast, and I'll send you a 5-minute video about that. My Instagram is @alignmentwithjen. So let's talk a little bit about the ego, the fear-based self, versus the intuition, the higher self, and what those sound like. So the ego is going to sound more protective. It's going to sound more fear-based, more survival, more attached to control and trying to make things happen because if they don't happen, I'm just going to absolutely die. Right? Obsessed with what other people think. It's very externally focused on survival, right? Because survival is very focused on the 3D. The intuition is loving. It is clear. It is grounded. It is expansive. It's the one that's like, hey, I think you can do it. I think you should try. I think you're going to be amazing. It's almost that little inner cheerleader that's excited for you to expand because our souls came here to expand. It's present. It's calm. It's purposeful. Right? It is all about that higher self version of you that you know deep in your soul you came here to be. It's very heart-centered. It's loving. It is not the one that's snapping at your partner or fearing that you're going to run out of money. That's old survival patterns. It is certain that you will always be taken care of. It is that deeper voice that you hear in moments of clarity. Okay? I want to chat for just a moment about what that actually is going to feel like for you to listen to it. So there is a journey for each one of us to go on to strengthen our intuition because we are going to always be getting intuitive hits, intuitive understandings. People call them downloads. But our ability to actually act on them or actually listen to them is what is going to strengthen our belief in them. A lot of people will get them and they'll be like, that doesn't really make sense. So they won't listen to it. So their intuition never really grows. You have to actually act on them and take the steps. I trust my intuition so deeply because I've done this so many times, right? And when I used to be super, super anxious, it was really hard for me to hear it, right? I had to go through some of that healing in order to start to hear it. But even when I was super, super anxious, I still remember moments where I heard my intuition and I was able to actually follow it. Right? So it's always with you. It's always guiding you. It's just, it gets louder and more clear the more regulated we are and the less it's competing in our mind against old self-beliefs. So it's going to feel and sound a little bit different for each person. As I mentioned, it might feel just like a knowing in your body. For some people, it might sound like a voice. I have a friend who, when she met her soulmate, she heard this voice in the shower that was like, this is your soulmate. You need to stop doubting this and just go for it. Right? For her, it was that voice. For some people, it's in meditation. They get visuals and images, or it could even be while you're driving in your car and you just have a very clear idea. For you, it's going to be a unique relationship. So you have to understand that and cultivate that. And what I'd love for you to do is just notice over the next 24 hours, how does that come through for you? It can come in signs and symbols as well. Like I see a lot of hummingbirds, and every time I see a hummingbird, I consider that like a symbol from my higher self because I don't believe anything is a coincidence. Noticing for yourself, and maybe to help you practice, if you're like, man, I feel like my intuition is terrible, practice by picking a symbol or an image like the hummingbird, and just noticing when you see it. For a lot of people, a way to practice using their intuition as well is to just noticing angel numbers. And when they see angel numbers, noticing, okay, this means that maybe I'm on the right path, or what I was thinking about is something for me to notice, right? But ultimately, the goal is that you don't need anything outside of you, that you're just very clear within yourself. The ultimate goal is just knowing that it feels right for you. And I think we've all felt that in certain areas. And when we practice following it, that's when we are going to actually be able to expand it. So let's talk about how to become incredibly intuitive. So the first one is what I mentioned earlier. It's regulating your nervous system and resting. It is getting into your body and creating space to rest. At least a couple of times a week, I'll either go to yoga nidra or I'll go to yin yoga, because I feel like that is the most high value thing I do almost all week, because I leave and I'm so clear. My nervous system is so regulated. I'm so calm. I feel great, right? My skin is glowing, and any issue I was trying to figure out is typically always figured out because I've created the space for it. Right? Imagine you have a closet and it's full of stuff and you're just trying to put more and more and more stuff in there. It's very difficult versus if you have a clean, empty closet, you can actually put things in and organize it. That's what happens when we create space in our nervous system. We can have these ideas just drop in so much more clearly, like the water metaphor I gave earlier. Also connecting into your body, because sometimes I think in modern society, a lot of people are so in their heads and just thinking. And what happens is we're not noticing those sensations and those cues that are coming from our body. And so things like dancing, breathing, singing, EFT tapping, meditation, walking on the beach and feeling the sand in your feet, or feeling the sun on your skin and just laying in the sun like a cat. All of those things are going to allow you to reconnect with those sensations of your body and actually practice reconnecting to your body so you can notice when your body is giving you clues and signals and information, right? Our body is so insanely powerful. So rest and connection to your body is the first one. Regulating into receptivity. So in one of my courses, I talk about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight. It's that more beta brainwave. The parasympathetic is that calmer nervous system, right? It's the alpha theta brainwave states. And I refer to this as the receptive mode. It's when you are receptive to those intuitions, those insights from the universe. And when we practice being in that state, which I believe the subconscious reprogramming work is essential for that. Reprogramming those old beliefs is essential for that, which that's what I do in my community, but also having daily practices. And I have 2 episodes all on the nervous system a little bit ago that you can listen to more about this if you feel like you need to regulate your nervous system. But heart-centered breathing, right? Slowing down, connecting to our body, spending time in nature, being quiet, not always having a podcast when you go on a walk, actually being present with yourself. And if that scares you, that's something to look at. But regulation allows us to be more receptive. Another thing to also notice is that intuition is not always going to be dramatic, and it's not always going to be this crystal clear sign. It's typically going to require a little bit of faith or a lot of bit of faith and trust. It's not always going to be this like flashing neon sign. This is what you need to do next. If that's what you're looking for, you're going to delay your journey. We want to actually notice that intuition is typically subtle. It's this quiet pull, this repeated thought of, I keep feeling like doing that and it just sounds fun and I want to do it, right? It doesn't have to make any logical sense. Like Steve Jobs' calligraphy class. It didn't make any logical sense. He was just interested in it. It can just feel like a yes in your body. So stop looking for that dramatic signal and start noticing those more subtle, clear signals. Because I promise you, when you learn to follow this, your whole life is going to open up. Watch out, because it's going to be pretty exciting. So another thing, and this is, I think, really important for no matter where you are on your intuition journey, is just practicing with low stakes decisions. I'm always making low stakes decisions based on my intuition because I want to keep growing it, because I know the payoff is gigantic. So maybe it's what coffee shop for you to go work at. One just intuitively feels a little bit better, even though it's a little further away. or what to eat, or what to post on social media, or where you're going to exercise that day. Just letting these small decisions be guided by noticing how it feels in your body and if it feels expansive and exciting. The more of those little steps that you take, the more and more that you're going to really trust in your intuition. Another big one I have for you is to observe your own energy. So notice when your energy expands or when your energy contracts. Notice what types of people, what types of environments, what types of conversations, what types of work. Because a lot of people come to me and they're like, I have no idea what my purpose is. I have no idea what I want to do. And that's typically not the truth. The truth is that typically it's that they're disconnected from what actually feels true for them. They're clogged up by stories and limiting beliefs and subconscious programs, and they can't actually hear the truth, because I believe your soul always knows, and it's always communicating that with you. And it might not communicate the whole path. It might be a step of the path, but we struggle to receive it. We struggle to be clear on it. So practice being a scientist with yourself and observing your energy. And then the final piece I have for you is acting on that advice. Your intuition will not grow if you're sitting on the couch and never acting on it. You have to actually take the risks in order to experience the benefits of it, for your life to keep expanding and expanding. So I hope this was so helpful for you and that you got a lot of insight and information, and I will see you in the next episode.